Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. So let's continue with our project. So far it looks a little bit chaotic, but don't worry, we're gonna put things in order very soon. So in this video I want us to create a few functions that will be used, and I will explain why we need these functions. So we have this list of functions here. Let me move this one to the top. Let's start with the app function here. So we already have an app variable. So I go to my index.php here. We have this app variable that contains, for example, the current URL in its split form. This is the same variable that we use when we are splitting our when we are trying to figure out what page we are on, for example, what contents are in the URL. Now every time we use it, we have to call global and then app like so. Now this can increase the amount of code that we have, and also we have, because this is an actual array, for example, if we want to access the URL in there, we will have to type it like this. But we can just make our work a little bit easier by just creating the same way we've created this URL function, and then we bring global app like that. We can also create an app function. So I'm just going to say function app capitalized like so. Okay. And in here we want to get a key. So I'm going to set it to a default value of empty string, just in case we don't want to put a key. Now, if we want to return all the values that are within app, the app variable, we don't put a key, but then if we put a key, then it tries to find that particular key and returns it. So first of all, of course, we have to bring in global app because that's the variable we're trying to access. And then here we will return the entire contents of app like that. Okay. But then if a key is provided, so we're going to say if not empty, like so, if the key is not empty, okay, then we go this way instead. So if the key is not empty, we, instead of bringing back the whole thing, let's do an else statement here, like so, so that we only bring back that if the key is empty. But then if none of this works, we have to return at least some kind of value, so we're going to return an empty string. You can either return an empty string or you can return a null. That's entirely up to you. And then if this is not empty and there's a key there, we just have to find out if the thing actually exists. So if not empty, so here we can just do something like return, and then we put an if statement. We say if not empty, like that, right? And then we put app, if not empty app, with that particular key, like that. Then we're going to return that particular item. So this is just an if statement we are putting here. So I'm going to put a question mark there and then put the app key. But if it is empty, then we're going to return null, like so. Simple and straightforward. So we can try this and use it. So I'm going to go to my plugin here. This is inside plugins, basic auth, and then plugin.php. So in here, what I want to do is just say call the app function like that, and I won't really put a key in there, right? So that it returns everything. Now I'm going to do D on this one, just so it can show me this nicely on the home page. So as you can see, this is what is inside the app thingy. So it contains even the plugins that are currently loaded right now. So as you can see, there's inside the plugins array, there's this basic authentication plugin, header, footer, and then home page, right? Apart from that, we just have the URL home, one item in the home. You will see this change if, for example, we go to a page like maybe products. You see that change to products because it contains what's in the URL. Now, speaking of plugins here, as you can see, this actually does contain all the plugins that are currently loaded right now. And so we can use this to show us what plugins are loaded. And we just need to know the names of the plugins that are loaded, or maybe the ID, I don't know, whichever value is important to you here, you can put, but I think the name is more descriptive of the plugin. So since we have this, now let's say I want to return something like just the URL or the plugins, then I would provide a key. So if in this case I go back here and inside here I provide the URL, then I'm telling it to just give me this item that has URL, which is products there. But what if I want to see the contained plugins? I'm going to do plugins like that. Okay, and then come back and refresh, and you see it shows me all the plugins. So the advantage of just creating a function is that we avoid doing all that global stuff, and it's all done within the function, which is great. Now if I put something that does not exist like that, then instead of giving me an error, it just returns an empty null like that, which is good. So that is dummy proof. Okay, so this is all good. Now inside, so we are done with this app function. That's good. Let's go to show plugins because it's quite related. So show plugins here. Now there is going to be times when you want to know what plugins are loaded in your current page. So this is good for debugging. So we're going to say show underscore plugins like that. And this is just going to repeat this very thing here and paste like that. And then all we need to do is return app plugins like that. Now we don't need to check if this exists because it always will, because we do create it whenever we are loading some plugins. And if we don't load any plugins, then the page won't load at all. So there's always going to be at least a single plugin, we know that, so this will never return an error. But just in case, you can just put 2 question marks and then return a null like that if you want to, or because this returns an actual array, you can simply return an empty array like that instead of the if that array does not exist. So, and also instead of returning this, this is usually going to be for debugging. So instead of saying return, we're just going to use the dd function like so and put that in there like that. That way it actually shows us what plugins are loaded. So if I go to my plugin here and I can just say dd and then do show underscore plugins like that, and actually I don't actually need to do the dd thing because it's already there in the function itself. All I need to do is say show plugins and it's going to show me what plugins are loaded. Now it's better I do this in here at the top there because this is for debug purposes, and there we go. So it will show me what now this is not very useful, this is too much information. I just want to know a list of names of the plugins that are loaded. So instead I just want to grab this name thing. Now this is an array of an array. There's an object in here, and okay, this is actually an object, not an array. So I can't use array column on these babies, but let's see, maybe I can. Who knows? So if I go to functions here, so instead of returning the whole thing here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say I'm going to say names, excuse me, is go to array column, right, like this. The input is app plugins like that, this array over here, okay, and then the column key is going to be name like that. So what array column does is that it goes into your array and looks at the arrays within and looks for the key that you provide. In this case, we provided name. So it's just going to get the name from this and the name from there and so on with every item, and then create a new array with a key value pair of name. It won't even put name, it just put 0, 1, 2, 3 as the keys, and then put these items in that array. So if I now refresh, nothing has changed because we didn't tell it to return that. So names is the new array. So instead I'm just going to say names or empty array like that. So let's give it a shot and let's refresh. And as you can see now, it gives me basic authentication, header and footer. This is more useful information to show me what plugins are actually loaded in here. Now you can obviously style this information a little bit better instead of having an array with stuff like that, but this is good enough for debug purposes. You see what are loaded here. So as you can see here, there's basic authentication, there's header, but if we go to the home page, for example, you will see that there are more plugins loaded on the home page than on the other page because we have the home page plugin there as well. Okay, so this also shows you the order in which these plugins are actually loaded. So that's cool. So that's one thing we can do with that. And then if I come back here, we have the set value function and the get value function. Now these are very, very important. So let me explain why we need these two functions. So let's say I have let me remove this. And on my page, I'm going to go back to the products section here because there's just less stuff going on. And if I come back, now imagine a situation where I have my controller here. So I know the controller runs first and then we run the view. But how we order them, how we order them in here does not matter. So, but what I want is that I can set a value over here and receive it in my view. So if I tried that, for example, I say echo, let's imagine we have a variable echo name. Let's just call the variable name. So in the controller, I know this controller will run first. So I'm just going to say name is equal to John, like that. So I set a name called John, and in my view file, I want to echo John. Now this is very common use case because you're going to do things in your controller and you expect those variables that you use here to be available in the view as well, so that you can echo the results of your controller. So this is very common use case. Now look what happens if I refresh it to tell me undefined variable name on line 5. Now the reason this is undefined, even though I defined it here on this function that ran first, is because these are isolated functions, right? So as we all know, a function has a local scope of its own because whatever variables you declare within a function, they're not available outside that particular function. So in this case, I declared this and I can't really get it in there, right? So one thing we can do is to create a function called setValue. So what we will do is we'll use a global variable instead and then save all our data in there and then get it from there again if we want it. So if I go back to functions, I can create a function here called setValue. So let's do setValue like this. So whenever you're setting a value, usually you have a key and a value like so. Key value pair, right? Because you need to be able to retrieve that value you're setting. That's why you need a key and then you need the actual value. Now, a value usually is always a string. So you could put stuff like, let's do string like here. This one could be a string as well, or it could be an array like that. So we can put 2 with a pipe there to show that this can be either. We can do the same thing here we can either return an array or a string. So let's start with a string, pipe array, like so. So this can either return an array or a string, but it could also return an object. So maybe you might want to go with mixed instead of having to pipe 3 items like that, but that's up to you. If you want to limit, you can do mixed like that. But keep in mind that if you're using PHP less than 8, this is going to be a problem. So you can do without these things. These hinting here, you can remove them and things will work just as well as they would here. It's just that when you add hinting like this, it makes it easier to find errors sometimes if this thing is congested, if your project is quite huge. So the value could have a default value like so, setting a value here, but the key is required, right? So in this case, let's just imagine the key is a string before we go into dealing with arrays. So I want to grab a global variable which I'm going to call user_data, like that. Now we need to create this in the global scope, of course. So I'm going to go to my index page here, and this is where I will create it. I'll say, let me use some tab keys there. I'll set that to an empty array, like so. So user data is equal to an empty array so that it exists. And then we come back to here. Now when I set a value, all I want to do is actually the return value. When we are setting a value, we're not returning any value. So let's put this as bool. This is just going to be a boolean telling us whether we did set a value or we didn't set a value. So I'm going to say user data and then put whatever key is in there and say is equal to whatever value was sent, like that. Now the key should not be empty. So if the key is not empty, and actually if the key is empty, this will throw an error. So I think this is okay. So we don't even need a return value here at all. So, but just to be neat, we'll do it like that. So user data key is equal to value blah blah blah. Now you can confirm that something was set by just checking if it exists, and then you can say true or false, but I think that would be overkill, so let's just leave it at that. Then of course with set value comes get value, so let's change that to get value, and this will always be a string. The key will always be a string, and we don't actually need the value because we just want to retrieve something. So the only thing we need is the key. So let's grab that key, and the result of this will be mixed. So we can just do mixed, or you can just completely ignore that whole thing altogether. So at this point, I want us to return what we have. So I'm just going to say return. I'm going to do a not empty one more time, like so. So if user data key is not empty, right, then return that very item. So let's not forget our question mark, and then full colon, and then either we return a null or something of that sort. Yep, we'll return one of those two. So this is just an if statement. It's saying if this is empty, if this is not empty, actually return it, but if it is, return a null. It's as simple as that. So let's see how this solves our problem. So if I come back to my plugin, now instead of saying name is equal to John, what I'm going to do instead is say set value, and I'm going to do it like this. I'm going to say set value like that, and null. The key here is name, like that, and the value is John. So you can either use single quotes or double quotes, doesn't really matter. So that's how you set a value. And then here you just echo the get value. So we say get value name. So we're going to say get value, and what is the key? Name, like that. It's as simple as that. So we set the value, and that's how we get values. So we only do this to variables that we want to be accessible in other functions as well. Those that we don't want to be accessible in other functions, we just do it the normal way. That way they're discarded once the function completes its run. So let me refresh, and now you can see John over there is being received even though it was set in a different function. So this is well and good, but we could do better. There are certain times you want to set values. This could be an array, you could set this to be an array, that's fine. But there are certain times you want to set multiple values in form of an array. So maybe you have an array of items like a key value pair. Let's say we say array is equal to, and then you say name. So name is John. Then maybe you want the age as well, 30, something like that. So now I don't want to save. I could just grab this and save it as data like that, and then put my array over here. This is going to work just fine. And if I want to echo, now I can't echo an array, so let's use the dd function at the end here, and I want to dd the data on the other side. So this is going to work just as well. Okay, so set value. Oh, okay. Wait, argument 2 must be of type string. So this is an error that we should fix. So let's go back to set value. This should not be a string. It can either be a string or an array. Actually, it could be mixed. It could be an object. It could be a resource. It doesn't really matter. So this could be a mixed value like that. So let's fix that. Let's refresh, and there we go. So now we have that array, and it's saved. Now, as you notice, this array is saved with one key, which is data in this case. So we are saving it as data, as the key. But what if I want to supply just this array like so, set data with the array, and then in this case I want separate variables where there's name and age as two separate variables, right? So that when I want to get a value, I could get a value like, let's say, just the age, like that. Now this is going to be a problem, but we should allow it to do this. So if I come back to my functions here on the set value, I could check, for example, and say if a key is an array, so if is array. It's as simple as that. This is why I love PHP. Very descriptive what you're trying to do. Okay, so there we go. We have our else statement here. So if the key is an array, we do something else. If it isn't, we do the normal thing. You could actually check to see if is okay. There's only two options. There's a string and an array. If we didn't have this, we would have to put an if statement here to check explicitly if it's a string as well. Then we ignore anything else. But luckily we have this. If somebody supplies something different, for example, an entire resource, then this will not work. It will produce an error here because it's only expecting a string and an array. So if it is an array, in this case, we just do a for each loop, and we loop between key and so we are looping through key. Key in this case is an array, so we can't use key over here. So I'm just going to say k, and then there's a value over here. So we're just going to repeat the same process over and over until we have all the items in the array added. So in this case, we are saying user data. Instead of key, we have k, and then is equal to value. It's as simple as that. So in this case, it's going to work. If I refresh, you see it shows me 30 because I did save. Let's come back here. I saved an array of data, and in this case, I'm just getting one of those items. So this is how we're going to be moving items between places. Now, this works just fine if, for example, we only have one plugin in this whole system, because let's say I set a value called name in this particular plugin, and then I use the same variable in a different plugin, then it's going to override my other plugin. So this is going to be a huge problem. It's especially a problem if the plugins are made by two different people who don't know each other or are not communicating. So they will use, even people who know each other and communicating, they may end up using the same variable names, and this might be a problem. So what we want to do is make sure that we save the variables of each plugin in a very separate location. Now, instead of us having to create many of these user data variables, because we don't know how many plugins we will have, instead we'll put an extra key in there so that we can oh, wait a second, yeah, so that we can save each plugin data in a different place. So we're going to rely on the config file here, and this config file should have an ID that is ideally unique to every plugin. So when you're creating your plugin, make sure your ID here is as unique as possible. You could even add numbers over here just to make it as random as possible so that it has a unique ID. This ID is meant to be unique to every single plugin. That way things will work better. Okay, and also in the functions here, when we are getting a value, there will be times when the string can be left empty. So let me just do equals like that to give it a default value. Now, if it happens to be that the what is this? If the key is empty, then let's return the whole get data array. So in this case, I'm just going to say if empty. So we give us that option. Then let's return just the whole user data like that. Otherwise, we will return this instead. So simple and straightforward. If that is true, this will happen. Otherwise, this will happen over here, which is also an if statement. Okay, great. So let's test that out before we deal with the individual stuff there, the uniqueness. So in this case, for example, I say get value and I don't specify whether I want the age or the name. Then in this case, it just bring every piece of data that is inside that user data thing. So here it was showing me 30, but if I don't provide a key, it brings me back the entire array. That proves to be very useful. Okay, now with that in mind, let's adjust our function to be unique to every single thing. So to every single plugin, that is. So like I said, in the JSON file of every plugin, this file should exist and there should be a unique ID in there. So we want to grab that unique ID and use it as the key to save items in there. So how do we grab this item here? Well, the first thing we need to know is to know which plugin we belong to in this case. What plugin are we dealing with? And we already know how to do this using that, what did we use last time? This whole backtrace business. So if I grab this backtrace thing, return get plugin dir, what? Okay. So I want to know the key and I want to know the backtrace file and get plugin dir. Okay, so I just want to load a file. So I'm going to use this version of things. So I'm going to copy that and let's go back to the top here. And I'm looking for set value, right? So right about here, I'm going to paste that information. So instead of the return, of course, we get the plugin dir. So I'm going to say path like so is equal to. Now this path over here, if I say set value, there will be a file. Okay, that's great. So here I want to die, and I want to echo path, just so I can see what's going on. So let's go ahead and refresh. So this is what I get: plugins basic auth. So I know this is my the place to get what I want. I want the config file. So here I'm just going to concatenate to the end of this, so say dot, and then in there I'm just going to say config.json, like that. Okay, so let me see that path one more time, and there it is. So this should be a real file, and if it isn't, then we have a problem. So what I'll do is say if file exists. So we'll say if file exists, and let me put path in there, and we only do the rest of this if the file exists. So then we can return false if things don't go very well. In fact, I don't even need this else statement. We can always avoid these else statements by just doing this, and then we don't need the else anymore, like that. Okay, great. So we either return true when it happens, or if nothing happens, we return false. So in this case, if file exists, path, that's great. Then I want to load that file. So I'm just going to say data or JSON. Let me just do JSON is equal to file get contents, like that. File get contents. I want to get the contents of that path file, and the result of those contents, I want to do a JSON JSON, what is it? Is it a decode or encode? So this is a decode, because I want to convert a string to an array. So once I reach here, I can do dd, like that, and do JSON. I just want to see what's inside that JSON file that I've created. And there we go. So it gives me the name of the plugin, the ID. So in this case, I just want the ID in this case. So I'm just going to grab that as our key. So I'm just going to say key is equal to, so maybe let's call it main key or plugin key, something like that. Plugin key or plugin ID instead. That's more descriptive. It's going to be JSON, and if we look at this, is it an array or an object? It's an object. So if it's an object, we use the arrow notation. So arrow notation like that to ID. So let's grab that ID. So now that we have the ID, we can just copy that. And in this case, if is array key, there we go, that's great. But then we put here that plugin ID before we put any of that stuff. Okay, same thing here. I'm just going to copy that and paste it here. So now it means all that information is saved inside the plugin ID, then that's when the array begins within that. So this is all good, but then it means we have to repeat our actions in the get value section as well, otherwise we won't find our data. So same thing here, and we will look for the file exists, and this portion of the code should be exactly the same as well. So I'm going to paste that like so, and wait, what am I trying to do here? I'm trying to see where I should end this, the closing of the if statement. Let me just do a return null here at the end, just in case. Okay. Aha, so what we have is that if file exists, we have that ID, and then we're going to check in here like so, and we will do exactly the same thing here like so. And same thing here. Boom, boom. Alrighty then, that actually solves the problem, right? So the ID determines where we save the data. Now let's see if we receive good data from there. Let's check it out. I'm going to come back to my plugin, and I'm saving that, and I want to get the same value on the other side. But it doesn't seem to be working at all. So here is the problem here. Let me go back to functions.php here. Let's see what could be the issue. Let's make sure that value is being set over here, because I think that's probably where the problem is. So for each key value that we have plugin ID. So what I want to do is copy this, but at the end of the day, before we return any true, I just want to see what's inside user data as a whole. So let me refresh, and okay, so there's basic auth, an array, good, but it doesn't contain any values. So this part works just fine, but why are the values empty? So that's weird. First of all, let me see which direction it takes. Hopefully it goes through here, which is the array section, and it doesn't. That's probably why. So why is that? This key should be an array, right? dd user data, or let me just say here, like that. Let's just say here, just to make sure that it is passing through there, and it isn't, right? So let me undo that. So if is array key, now did I just mess up key somewhere? Okay, so these are the issues you have to look out for when you're doing programming, right? Because key here is being replaced. This is the original key, and it's being replaced here. So that's not good. Let's change that to something like I key or something, just so it's different from the key here. Or you can capitalize one of these, because PHP is case sensitive, so that should work. That should solve the problem. We need to do the same exact thing here as well. Let's put I over there and I over there, since we're just using that on two places. So if I now refresh, everything seems to work fine, because now it can return the data that I want. Now I'm going to show you that there's no mixing of data here. If, for example, in my plugin, you see I have this very code here. This one is John, this one is John with age 30. Let me copy this. Let me go to another plugin like header footer here, and inside the plugins here, oh, there's quite a bit going on here, right? So with all of this, I want to remove what's here already. Let me paste that instead. And what else? In the controller over here, that's where I want to put, that was for the controller actually. So this should go in the controller to set the value. Now, of course, you don't have to follow these rules. You can set the value in the view or wherever you want at any point. So the view just echoes the data. But I want to change this data to Mary, so it's different. Okay. So let's see in this case where both are on. Oh, we're still getting that, which is not cool. Let me remove this thing here. But as you can see, it's working. This is from the one of the plugins, and the data remained, the integrity of the data is intact. It's the same data we saved, we get it back. Same thing here, we set it in our controller and got exactly the same thing back. So there's no connection between the two plugins. The variables in one do not mix with the variables in the other. And let me remove this part that's echoing this. I can't even remember where the this should have been here. So that's the part I should remember to remove. Let's refresh, and there we go. Okay, so data integrity is intact, and that is good. So now we are able to move variables between several functions of the same plugin, which is very useful. And yeah, we've done all of these functions over here. So that's a wrap for this particular video, and I will see you in the next one.